So, with the Snyder Cut approaching, I thought I would revisit Snyder's previous collaborations when it came to the DC Universe. So, recently I gave Man of Steel a rewatch. Now, I have a pretty complicated history when it comes to this movie. First of all, I saw this on my 13th birthday, and I remember just thinking it was amazing because it's a movie like perfectly suited for a kid that age. And I remember just thinking everything about it was so cool, and then it was also around this time that I was first getting into like YouTube and watching stuff and movie reviews. And it was kind of that year that I first figured out that a movie could be controversial, that there could be a lot of people that really like a movie and a lot of people that really hate a movie. And as a 13-year-old kid, having this thing that I really liked and a lot of people telling me it was terrible really bothered me, and I did not react that great to the controversy. I would get pretty angry at anybody who said that they didn't like the movie. I would subscribe to YouTube channels that I didn't even really care for just because they gave the movie a positive review. So this and Iron Man 3 to an extent, because that movie was also kind of controversial, and I was actually on the other side of really not liking Iron Man 3. So that was kind of the year I really figured out, oh, not everyone agrees on movies. Not everyone just thinks a movie is really good or really bad. People can be very mixed on things. And the massive amount of debate around this movie, like, still lasts to an extent. I think that is in part because Snyder has continued to like remain in the pop culture zeitgeist when it comes to comic book movies. And the debate around whether or not he's a good director or not, or whether or not he understands these characters, still kind of remains in the conversation. But I decided to go back to Man of Steel because his version of Justice League is going to come out soon, and try to unbiasedly look at it and see whether or not I think it's a good movie. Now, there's a lot of people that don't like this movie because they don't think this movie is a good interpretation of Superman. They see Superman as needing to be portrayed in a certain way, and they get upset when like things like get kind of switched up a bit or like taken in a direction they're not really happy with. And I can completely relate to that and completely understand why people don't like this movie purely because they don't see it as a good representation of Superman. I even suffer from that as well when it comes to, say, Tom Holland's Spider-Man. I like Tom Holland as Spider-Man, and I think the movies that they've made with him are very well done. I just find certain aspects of that don't meet up with what I think Spider-Man should be. So I can easily relate to people having that same problem with how Superman is portrayed in this and other subsequent DCU films. However, personally for me, the direction they went with didn't really bother me. Trust me, I really like the classic version of Superman, but I still have the Christopher Reeve version. I still have the DC animated version of Superman, and I still have the comics. So I'm open to a different interpretation of Superman. I also disagree with people who say this Superman is depressing. I say it's more that he's conflicted. Like, the purpose of this Superman is that he's struggling with who he is. Because we all struggle at some point with who we are and what we're meant to do. So it's kind of showing, well, what if somebody found out that their existence was a monumental change to, like, everything we know, and he's, like, has all these abilities, and he's, like, deemed to be special in some way. How would someone like that handle that? And I find that direction that Snyder was trying to go in intriguing. Like, what if Superman didn't know for sure, like, if he should be this, like, symbol, if he should, like, or whether, like, if he should stand out and use his abilities. I found that an interesting direction. However, I don't really know if Snyder was completely successful upon rewatching this movie. I feel to an extent that it has to do with the structure of the movie, and the how they do deal with the flashbacks and telling the story out of order. I feel like they were trying to replicate what Nolan did with the Dark Knight trilogy, and this resembles Batman Begins in a bunch of different ways, including them having his origin be somewhat out of order. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad way to tell the story, because it enables you to, like, give the context of his backstory while still, like, keeping the audience invested with an adult Superman. The problem and the difference between this and Batman Begins is when we see him as an adult between those flashbacks, I don't feel like he's getting enough development, and we're really not figuring out that much about an adult Clark at this point. Like, I feel the flashbacks are really well done because they get you to emotionally connect with this kid and understand the conflict and the problems that he's dealing with in this situation, and kind of his father trying to help him, guide him through this, but also not really knowing for sure what to do either, which is where the famous him saying maybe to him letting those kids die come from. He does not know what to do, but he knows that he was sent here for a reason. I find that really intriguing. I think most of those flashbacks are really well done. However, when we cut back to Clark as an adult, we don't really get much with him until he gets to the alien ship, and he gets all the answers to who he is and like why he was sent there. I think it would be a bit more interesting and easier to connect with Clark if we get more of him before that. I also feel the breakneck pace of the story also kind of hurts that the movie can't really decide whether it wants to be a slow-paced like character piece about Superman or if it wants to be a super fast-paced action sequence. And I do feel that's in part to the fact that there is probably one too many action sequences. I feel like, for example, Superman fighting like the security like probe in the scout ship, or him fighting the tentacles like at the world engine, feel kind of extraneous. A lot of the action in this is really well done. Like the fights in Metropolis and Smallville are very well done, and we finally get to see like what it would be like for someone like Superman to fight in live action. Because, like, obviously they are kind of constrained in the 70s when they did the Christopher Reeve movies, and for whatever reason, Bryan Singer wanted his Superman movie to be boring and have very little action in it. So this is where we finally get to see Superman unleashed. But I do think the action can be a bit extraneous at points, and I do think a couple, like, of the smaller pieces maybe should have been cut out, and time should have been spent more on developing Superman himself. Like, because he does have some scenes that do help humanize him and help you relate to him. I just think his journey would be more successful if that was a bit more fleshed out. But overall, I think the cast in this is very well done. Henry Cavill does a great job as Superman, both in humanizing him and making you relate to him, but at the same time being able to like embody like kind of the symbol and of Superman. And I just think the rest of the cast overall does a great job. I think Amy Adams is great as Lois Lane. Same thing as Kevin Costner and Diane Lane as Pa and Ma Kent. Jor-El, I think, is well cast with Russell Crowe. I really like Michael Shannon as General Zod in this. He does a great job of making the character threatening, and you can obviously tell that he's kind of crazy, but at the same time, they show his motivation and reasoning for why he's doing this and why he thinks he's doing the right thing. I also really like how they deal with the implications of what would happen if an alien like Superman did come down and how humanity would react to that, and Superman worrying if they will accept him or not. I think that's an interesting like kind of way to go with that kind of meets with the idea of this Superman being conflicted on what he should do. And actually think that's something that is handled well as they go along to future movies with Batman v Superman. Also, really love Hans Zimmer's score for this movie. It builds up kind of the size and like magnitude of the story while also being able to play up the smaller moments and the more personal side of it. I think it kind of works perfectly for this Superman. Now, to address some of the other criticisms with this movie, maybe the destruction in this is pretty excessive, and that Superman maybe could have done a bit more to like lead Zod away from the battle in Metropolis. But at the same time, I don't really agree with the statement that Superman destroyed like these two cities, because it's a Superman that has probably learned to his full extent of his power like a month ago, dealing with military-trained Kryptonians with the same power as him. So I kind of understand why he's like struggling to really contain them. And most of the destruction is caused by them and not him directly. Like most of the things he destroys are him indirectly being thrown into them by the Zod and the other Kryptonians. The product placements in the movie can be a bit distracting, but I don't think they're honestly that big of a deal. I think it's a small nitpick at best, and I think it's way too much attention thrown at it. Like, it really isn't that distracting. As for the tone of this movie, people act like it's completely dark and humorless, but there are like some minor moments of levity in the movie. There's just not that much attention given to those moments. Like they're kind of just a light little joke here and there. They're not as like at the forefront as say in a Marvel movie. And I feel like people saying that these are too dark and that they should be more like Marvel movies not only is just ignoring moments like this in the movie, but I think is undermining the serious moments and the drama in Marvel movies. Because now DC fans, when they hear the criticism that their movies are too dark and serious, they just begin to think as Marvel movies as big joke factories with a lot of one-liners and nothing else to them. And I feel like that's kind of giving a disservice to both of them. And it actually is kind of weird going back to this, seeing just how realistic they're trying to make this universe. Seeing how this was pretty much a standalone movie and was kind of drawing more from the Dark Knight trilogy than the MCU at this point. Because going to even to Batman v Superman and what we see Zack Snyder's doing with Justice League, the realism is kind of being lowered a bit as you have to introduce Amazons and Atlanteans and New Gods. You can't play it as realistic as you can just with like one like group of aliens existing. So I find it interesting how they've gone more from Dark Knight focus to more cinematic universe focus and going a bit more comic bookish with everything as they went on. As for the look of this movie, it's a bit of a mixed bag for me. I think there's some really well shot cinematography in this, even though I think at the same time they do that zoom in trick way too often when it comes to the action of the movie. I think they probably should have toned that back a lot. Also, I'm not a big fan of the color scheme of the movie. I think it's way too gray looking and desaturated. Like, I understand they were going for a more realistic and serious take on Superman, but I don't think that necessarily needed to equate to such a muted color scheme. I still think Superman in this movie is supposed to represent a symbol of hope. You can have his colors kind of like stand out a bit more, because there's some moments the suit doesn't even look blue, it looks black. And I know it sounds like I'm ragging on this movie a lot, but that's not because I dislike the movie. I do genuinely like this movie. Just rewatching it, it's not perfect, and there's some flaws I do think lower it in my standard, but I do think there's a lot of great scenes just by themselves. Like I said, a lot of the stuff, flashbacks to his childhood, him learning to fly for this first time is really well done. I think a lot of the scenes with him and Lois are well done. I think Henry Cavill and Amy Adams have solid chemistry. I think the action sequences that work really well. And I do think this set up a lot of potential for future movies. And I'm also very interested to see, looking back at this, how self-contained this movie is. Like, we don't even really have that much of a tease for a direct sequel to this, not alone the cinematic universe that Warner Brothers kind of wanted to spawn from this. Like, there's really only small little hints and Easter eggs in the background. Like you see a LexCorp truck and you see a Wayne Enterprise satellite, but that's it. Like, there's really not a ton like of setting up for future movies, which is kind of in contrast to Batman v Superman, which gets criticized for trying to do way too much to set up a cinematic universe. But we'll get to that when I cover that movie later on. But overall, I still like this movie. So for all you people that dislike Man of Steel, I'm not siding with you here, even though all my criticisms of it probably also alienated all the fans of this movie. I'm wondering if this movie is too controversial for me to take a middle-of-the-road stance on it. Like, you have to think it's great, or you have to think it's trash. You can't think it's just good. But overall, I do still like this movie, and I like the direction it was trying to go in, even though I don't think it was completely successful. But I'll be back probably later at some point with Batman v Superman. I don't know when I'll get to that because, of course, I have more episodes of WandaVision coming up. But I definitely will try to get a Batman v Superman review out before the Snyder Cut comes out. But overall, what do you think of Man of Steel? Is my opinion completely wrong, or do you completely agree with me? Put in the comments below and let me know.